Welcome back. It's another episode, Better Learning Podcast. We're going to jump right into a conversation we're already having with David Okoyman, who is with NookPod, who you've talked about. And if you've seen us at any conferences, they've been a great partner for us. So I thought it would be good to bring them into the conversation. David, how you doing?
Hey, Kevin, I'm great. Great to be here. Thanks very much.
So we've been working with you guys at a lot of these conferences when we're doing live events, and one of the first things that always comes up is the second they sit down to do a recording, it's this wow factor of like, ooh, this is nice every single time. And so we thought, it'd be good to talk about that. So I wanted to start out though with your history. Give me an idea, like what was school like for you? How did you even get onto this path?
So I'm a product designer. I'm originally from Dublin, in Ireland. I've always had engineering in my blood. How things are made is very much, I wander the world, pulling it apart in my imagination and putting it back together again. And I've always been into art and form and trying to, bring those elements together. So I've always, it's called a sort of homo prospectus. It's this notion of wandering the world, imagining better futures and plotting a path to get to those futures. And I'm ADHD myself. I'm mildly dyslexic. So my challenges have been around sort of focus, disturbance, distraction throughout my life. And I've always had to, manipulate my environment in order to be able to succeed in a way that society, school, the structures of school have demanded of me, where there haven't been the sort of, the choices, in order to consume the subjects in perhaps the way that I might have liked to. So I've always been, that round peg, making myself successfully fit in the square hole. I think there's three types of people in school. There's the ones that really fit with the way school is designed to work. There's the ones that really don't but can manage. And then there's the ones that really don't but can't manage. So I was in the middle.
Yeah. And I feel like that's where the majority of people are actually. It's not fitting for everyone, but they're finding ways to fit around it. And what's really cool about the discussions that we're having, we're seeing kind of the movement, really around the world of how do we change it? How do we become more student-centered instead of trying to make them fit into here? How do we support the best way for them to learn and develop and become kind of that next generation that we need? So it's interesting to hear you do that and then see like how you're helping do that with the type of work that you've done. Give me an idea. Give me the story of how did NookPod come about?
Well, to that point, right, I've always struggled with this notion that the world needs to improve and it needs to be kinder. And it's like feel safer. If people feel safe, then they will be more willing to come forth, step out of themselves, contribute, be able to learn, be able to engage, be able to focus on those things. But I know that I have, limited scope for that change, right? I'm not going to start an organization, hire hundreds or thousands of people. But what I can do is I do have a good set of skills for creating solutions that can be easily fit into the world. A lot of people focus on designing new spaces. And that's great and wonderful and really important. But my bug is that, 100% of space which already exists. That's such a glib thing to say. But it's true. We need to work retrospectively on the spaces that are already there. We need to work on the schools that already exist. We need to work on the work environments. We need to work on, the third spaces that already exist. So what I wanted to do was essentially create an ingredient, a retrofittable modular component that could easily be dropped into any existing environment, that could be sent anywhere in the world. Somebody with no skills could easily put it together. So basically on the back of an envelope, almost with such a terrible cliche, but it's true, on the back of an envelope, I sketched this idea that really tapped into this notion of, the pyramid of needs, and at the top is shelter. So this idea of harking back to our childhood when we used to climb underneath the stairs or underneath the table in our grandparents' living room, where we could get out of the spotlight, but still be part of what was going on. Kids do it and puppies do it. They climb in underneath and protect themselves, but they still are able to observe. So it's about getting out of the spotlight. So basically that's what I wanted to do, was wanted to craft little spaces like that made us
That's
feel
interesting to hear you put it in that perspective. What was that kind of spark, that moment that drove that?
Frustration. They say necessity is the mother of invention, but so too is frustration. I just got really despondent about the state of both education and the workspace, and I felt that it had been designed by no disrespect, but by extroverts for people like themselves, and it didn't think about quiet minds and quiet moments. And so basically it was a case of, okay, I'm in this cushy job. I'm in this big international company. Everything's going in the right direction now. I can stick with this for basically the rest of my career. Or I can take a jump off the cliff and see if I can do something about this. And that's what I did.
Yeah. I mean, so I remember in the conferences, back in these educational conferences, going around, and I would say, probably 2015, 2017. I'd have to look exactly when, but the book by Susan Cain of Quiet came out that really sparked this conversation. It was the whole idea that introverts and that they need that space, that time to feel safe, to reflect, to just be able to do that. It doesn't mean, and then when you kind of couple that with the end of average discussion, it doesn't mean that they're introverted 100% of the time. It just means that they need some recharge. And my take is that everyone's got those moments. They don't have to be just labeled as an introvert. Everyone has those moments where they just want to kind of separate and just be like, all right, I need my space in here.
Same for me. Look, I use introvert and extrovert because it's convenient.
Oh, for sure.
But it's a gross generalization. We as a species are addicted to analog. It needs to be black or white, introvert or extrovert, happy or sad. But the world is all the gray and all the colors in between. So the principle that I really use when I'm designing with these things in mind is that if you design with extreme needs, you benefit the mean. So by creating solutions which are better for people who have one arm, I mean, that's a real niche market, right? But if you're designing for people with one arm, you're also helping people who are, have a broken arm, or who are carrying a baby, or who have a phone in one arm, hand, So it's about permanent and sort of, temporary midterm and temporary short term. When you design a website that's for somebody who's sight impaired, well, you have to pare away all the superfluous information. You have to create good contrast between the background and the foreground. You have to justify things in such a way that makes it easy for someone with dyslexia to find the next line. And you end up with a website that's better for everybody. So design for the mean, for the extreme benefits the mean is a principle.
Yeah, I've heard you use that phrase before. It's so strong, of designing for the extreme. Yeah, I mean, it's a great approach. It's again, kind of coming back to that end of average approach of, if you're designing for the average, you're really designing for no one.
And stronger still, if I may, I think it's not just about, inclusiveness for the point of inclusivity, and not because, well, we need to make sure to not leave people out. I think these are tools to get more out of everybody. I think this is a way of unlocking all of our potential. I think in particular, my area, the built environment, creates unsafety and locks away potential and is preventing the average person from expressing themselves and bringing their entire selves to bear on whatever it is, whether it's learning or working or performing or whatever it is that might be. I think as a species, I think we're doing a terrible job of unlocking our potential. And I think, with some useful tools and design thinking around inclusivity, we'll do a better job for everybody.
I want to go to just the emotion that you mentioned of being able to take that leap from working in the corporate to be able to go do something that it definitely relates to me. And I feel like a lot of people who have had that, of just that feeling of, all right, this isn't where I'm supposed to be. But it's really hard to take that step to do those things that you want to be. Would you mind sharing a little bit of what your mindset was like? What were those moments like when you were trying to make that decision?
Well, I think you need to have a combination of confidence and ignorance. The ignorance is really important because if you can see all the pitfalls along the way, it'll keep you on the top of that cliff and it'll stop you from jumping. But a lot of it is driven by this notion of, look, I have these skills. I know how to get stuff done. I know how to get stuff made. I have this instinct. I have these logical thoughts about, what can be done and how it can be approached and what the pitfalls will be. But I also have this instinct in here that this is the right move to make at the right moment for me, for my career, and that there are the networks around me. I was living in a place at the time. Right now I'm based in Amsterdam, but back then I was living in Bristol. And there's an amazing ecosystem in that area which supports startup. And the same here in Amsterdam too. We have like the second highest per capita of co-working in all of Europe. And I think that's an indication of the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that you have. So I knew, in the environment that there was the right sort of people around. There was early customers. I knew I could get a product into market quickly, not like software where you have to spend a long time developing, spending all your money before you hope to make some money back. I knew I could get to market with something that could be revenue positive very quickly. And so my idea was always to grow sustainably. And that meant that the jump wasn't a huge cliff, perhaps, but it may be a smaller jump to something that was a little bit more attainable. And so doing that and having a little bit of savings, but having a small plan in place for how I could get things off the ground in a soft, achievable way, gave me the confidence to make that step. And I always felt that if I needed to, I could get a job pretty quickly again if I decided to abandon everything. I haven't done it yet, but it's always there in the back of the mind if you need it.
Yeah, well, I know that's kind of that was always my motivating factor is one, it was a long time for me to get that confidence. And people always say like entrepreneurs, like they're the risky ones. But the reality is most that I know are super risk adverse, and they're doing all the things to set it up to minimize that risk, and knowing how do you make that where it's not a big leap, but it's just like a step in there. But
right. Right.
And I know.
And what I did in that respect too, I also prototyped really quickly, got people to critique the work really quickly. Like my approach to design and development is really open book very early. Like I don't want to spend a long time developing a thing until the point that I think it's finished and then put it into the market and be told it wasn't finished at all. I would rather go really early and go, look what I've done, and have people go, no, not like that, so that I can figure out how to get it right quickly. Thankfully, I did that. And a lot of the feedback early on was there's something in this, even if it wasn't right immediately. It didn't have the right ergonomics. It didn't have the right ratio, human space ratio. It didn't have the right soundproofing or focus on high frequency noise that I needed it to have. But very quickly, the feeling was, yeah, there's something here.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing it, because I wanted to tap into that, because this isn't about everyone just quitting their jobs and starting their own company type of thing. But it is about the idea that change makers are the ones that are going to have to drive it and be able to take those calculated risks. And it doesn't mean you need to quit your job all the time. It doesn't mean that it has to go down this path. But we know there's a lot of people out there that see that, but fear is really strong. It is really hard for people to overcome that, and say like, okay, if I do this, then it's really easy to go to the worst case scenarios.
It is, but I would say there's never been a better time than right now, in the sense that you can build a lot without building much. And what I mean by that is you can sell products anywhere in the world or within reason, in the geographies that make sense to you without having infrastructure in those places. You can partner with factories to make stuff. You can hire virtual staff to get things done. You can use a little bit of AI or ChatGPT or whatever it is to help with business plans. There's a lot of templates out there for your website. There's a lot of stuff you can do for little in order to get off the ground before you then start to, need people and need those bigger infrastructures and resources to scale.
Yeah. So, and that's exactly it. And I love what you said there too, of just being around other people too, that are like that. So you're not feeling like you're the only kind of crazy person out there doing something. That was really important for me, of just finding other entrepreneurs, other business owners that were going through similar things. It's what we tried to recreate for education leaders. So like superintendents, school administrators, of just knowing that change makers need that. Like everyone thinks that it's just this individual that's going to change the world. And sometimes we have, examples of that. But most of the time, it's just getting surrounded by other people that are willing to challenge that status quo.
Really is.
So that
it's powerful.
It is. And so whether you're a teacher,
it
architect,
almost becomes a juggernaut. You can't stop it. Once you start telling people what you're doing, you really feel this need to keep doing it or pushing it forward.
Exactly. There's this energy that comes from it. And so that's my thing for the listener, wherever you're at. If you're feeling, you're recognizing that whatever you are working on is not working the right way, or you're seeing like any opportunity, whether you're a teacher, wherever you're at, man, we need you now more than ever to step up and try something different. And if you feel like you've got otherwise, there's a lot of these types of people out there that surround yourself around. And that's what I love about doing this show and the community that we're building around it.
Digitally as well as physically, get out to the local maker spaces or to the startup communities or to the, clubs that are built around entrepreneurship, or get on to your meetup.com or to, your online communities where people are gathering and sharing their ideas and helping each other move forward.
David, let's talk specifically, because I want to talk about your product for the people who haven't, and we'll definitely link to websites and examples of it. But do you mind just kind of giving your 30-second, if somebody's like, what is that? Explain to me what it is.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So Nook is all about creating a quiet moment out of the spotlight in order to fine tune your mind, in order to think your thoughts, in order to be able to focus. And whether that focus is on whatever you're thinking, a conversation, some work that needs to be done, but the world is otherwise overwhelming, and climbing into a Nook, and I'm going to say a little bit more about its physicality in a moment, but climbing into a Nook, you referenced it. The first experience that you have is a sense of, hey, how's it doing that? It's open completely on one side, and yet I sit in here and it feels different. And it feels different because it is different. There is a microclimate. It's been measured inside. It has different pressures. It has different effects on your ears, and therefore it has a different effect on your brain. It essentially looks like a little house. You can imagine it's like a sophisticated adult version of a child's playhouse almost, but it's a sophisticated environment inside where you can sit, open your laptop, open your mind, have a good conversation, feel safe, not be approachable. There's no surprises inside a Nook. You can see everybody coming. In biophilia, they call it refuge and prospect. Nook is the refuge from which you can prospect over the world. So it's about creating a little bit of safety for people in a physical space that's plug and play and easy to move around in an environment. So it benefits not just the user, but also the operator of the space to have that physical flexibility to be able to adapt the space depending on.
Yeah, perfect. And what I love about too is, one, they're cool looking, like they're attractive. They don't they don't hurt aesthetically wherever you're putting them. But the fact that they are mobile, to me, it is just amazing. I mean, I can talk about where we've seen them in use, everything from like just in the common areas within a school to the lobbies to outside where sporting events, used as phone booths, used as just as quick touch point meetings for individual use like that. We've seen them used for podcast recording. That's what we do when we're at conferences, being able to be in a loud area, like a registration area of a conference, to be able to just sit in this and still have kind of that quiet area to record a podcast. Where else do you see it?
Yeah, that mobility is such an important factor. I think with the best will in the world, with the best designers in the world, when you design a space, you have to make allowance for the fact that when you design on paper, it's not the same as living and experiencing, right? In the real world, as soon as you move into a space, almost the first thing you do is you go, oh, darn, why did we put that wall there? Right? So I think greater flexibility and mobility is a key ingredient for the future. So where do we see them? We see them in the classroom themselves as a really successful space to be able to step out of that overwhelm of the mixed environment, but still to feel present and not miss any of what's happening in the lesson. We see them activating corridor spaces. Corridors have become boulevards in school education environments at all different levels. So to be able to provide that as a drop-in space where students, learners can get together and can collaborate and congregate in a positive way. We see them used in libraries. We see them used as a breakout space. We see educators using them. In fact, we see educators sometimes even fighting with learners to use them. I've seen headmasters, head teachers in Nooks using it as their get their head down space, because something interesting happens. It's called permission signaling. When you go into a Nook, what happens is people will go, hey, where's Kevin? And they'll go, oh, he's in the Nook. I'll catch him when he comes out. It creates a kind of a gentle barrier that hasn't isolated you from the environment. You can still be alert and conscious and connected to what's going on. But it has created this little bit of a door without a door to say, just let me be for a little while, guys. I'll be back. And I'm here if you need me. We see it in atria, in those big open spaces that are designed purposely to be wonderfully open and useful for town hall, community type gatherings. But they can also be quite overwhelming because they're so open. So in order to create space within a space, and then we see them moving around a lot. So you might have different activities going on in the morning, mid-morning, afternoon, nutrition time, later on. And then even in the evenings with events and things like that, they become this sort of multi-purpose, multi-use space. Sometimes even used as reward. Oh, you get to go in the Nook now. Type of space for learners and stuff too. I'm blown away every week by some new story about how a school or workplace is making use of them.
Yeah, and it made me think too, cafeterias are a big place too, because exactly what you're talking about there, where they're big, wide open spaces. So I'm just glad you brought it to. We also talked about just some of the unique things around the world. What are those things that have surprised you? Where you're like, oh man, NookPod is over here. I never anticipated there, but it's there now.
I mean, they're using it as like a sensory sort of decluttering space in sports stadia, in Broadway theaters. We have a partnership coming up now with museums. So there's an organization called Kids in Museums, and they're using Nook to create a touchdown space for children, especially neurodivergent, but not exclusively neurodivergent children when they come into museums. We see them now in libraries being used as a space for people who maybe don't speak the language and they feel self-conscious, a space for adult education because people feel a little self-conscious when they're when they're going through education when they're a little bit older. We see them being used as a business space in those types of environments too. I'm absolutely, and at events, and podcasting, you mentioned it as well, Kevin. I think that's one of the biggest tests of a Nook. And to see the success of a Nook as a podcasting space really shows you what it's doing in terms of not just the acoustics, but also in terms of how people in a highly distracting environment can manage to sit and focus and take a moment in the middle of that madness.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate our partnership as a podcast and working with you even on our K-12 on our company side, it's been great to see. And these are the types of options and ways at approaching problems differently with unique solutions. To me, it's what it's all about. We kind of started with it talking about everyone learns differently to wrapping it up here. So, David, really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Kevin. Absolute pleasure.
And for the listeners, if you've not hit subscribe wherever you are doing that, hit that right now. And betterlearningpodcast.com is the hub for everything about the podcast. But we really appreciate all the feedback that we get from you as a listeners, and know that this community here, we're not just doing this to talk. We're doing this because we want to improve these learning environments, improve the outcomes for learners. And it starts with these change makers, whether they're coming from inside the walls of school or from outside the walls. So this is a perfect example of that. So we will talk to you soon. The views and opinions expressed in the Better Learning Podcast are those of myself as an individual and of my guest, and do not necessarily represent the organizations we work for, the Association for Learning Environments, K-12, Education Leaders Organization, or Second Class Foundation.